Hi everyone, I'm Wendy, and today I thought it would be fun to take a look at the nutrition I was getting on a standard American diet and compare that to how I ate on a paleo diet, and finally, what I'm getting today on my whole food vegan diet. I'll be using Cronometer to compare the nutrition between the three plans and see if I really need to worry so much about things like protein, iron, omega-3s, and more. First, let's start with a typical day of eating for me when I was eating a standard American omnivorous diet. From here on out, I'll refer to this as my SAD diet. I often started my day with some instant oatmeal along with a fruit smoothie. One of my favorite combos was mango, raspberry, and banana. Then, one of my favorite healthy meals was pan-fried tilapia along with brown rice and pan-seared cherry tomatoes. To make sure I got all my fruit servings, I'd have something like an apple with it. Often, I ended the day with some kind of packaged meal. I loved these Red Baron French bread pizzas. They came 2 in a box, and yes, I'd eat both, but I'd have a salad with it, and in my mind, that made it a well-rounded, healthy meal. In addition to 3 meals, I always had snacks throughout the day because I would get hangry if I didn't eat every 2 hours or so. Typically, I'd have at least a few snacks, something like Cheez-Its, dark chocolate, and yogurt. So this is a pretty typical full day of eating on my SAD diet, and I'll just briefly scroll through the nutrition now. You can pause the video if you want to look closer at everything, but I'll review this in more detail after I show you the other 2 sample days of eating. Next up, prior to becoming vegan, I went through a period of a few years where I was eating a Whole30 and then a Paleo style diet. I thought this was an improvement over my SAD diet because I had removed all processed foods and refined sugars. But was it really all that great? I kept a very close food diary during my Whole30, so I used an actual entry from that diary to complete this example. I started the day with 2 eggs scrambled in oil with spinach wilted in. I drank a cup of bone broth and had that along with some mandarins and a handful of almonds. Lunch included pork loin, a baked sweet potato, and a salad made of lettuce, cucumber, celery, Kalamata olives, and a simple dressing of lime juice and olive oil. Just like when I was on my SAD diet, I like to get another serving of fruit with lunch, so I had an apple. Finally, dinner was pan-fried salmon with onions, garlic, and broccoli sautéed in olive oil. And for dessert, mixed berries. During my Whole30, I didn't snack. I stuck with only my 3 meals a day. This was one benefit of this style of diet. I think I was able to avoid snacking because by eliminating refined sugar, I wasn't having so many sugar crashes throughout the day anymore. Again, you can pause here if you want to review the nutrition carefully. Otherwise, we'll compare it later after we look at a typical day of eating on my whole food plant-based vegan diet. I pretty much eat the same breakfast every day now, so I have a custom meal made in Cronometer with my usual. That includes oatmeal cooked with riced cauliflower, dates, pumpkin puree, blueberries, and topped with ground flax seed. I have that with a smoothie, and one of my favorites is a combo of banana, mango, greens, and a little bit of plant-based milk. My favorite go-to lunch is to mix brown rice, beans, bell peppers, and corn with some salsa. I'll usually have that with potatoes, mandarins, and maybe a little avocado. Finally, one of my typical dinners is my Instant Pot curry. I'll pop the video for that recipe up on screen here. I like to eat that with either rice or sorghum, and I'll have a small side salad with it. A typical salad will include the basics like lettuce, tomato, cucumber, onions, and maybe some hemp seeds. Finally, as always, I like to add some kind of fruit like grapes. So here's a quick glance at my whole food vegan nutrition, and let's take a closer look now and compare the nutrition across all 3 of these sample diets. Let's start with calories. Of course, the number of calories you need to consume will vary based on activity levels and weight goals. In my adult life, I've kept a pretty consistent weight and activity level, and you can see that my SAD diet and vegan diets have roughly the same number of calories. SAD diet coming in at 2,417 calories, and vegan diet at 2,448. My Whole30, on the other hand, was significantly less at only 1,817 calories. The macro breakdown among these 3 is very different as well. SAD diet breaks down to 18% protein, 33% fat, and a healthy 49% coming from carbs. My Whole30 had much higher fat and protein content. 28% protein, 40% fat, and only 31% carbs. My vegan diet comes in at only 13% protein, 14% fat, and 73% carbs. Anecdotally, I can say that I much prefer this high carb ratio because of how it makes me feel energetically. On my SAD diet, I was always sluggish, I had to drag myself out of bed, and I always had an afternoon slump. I didn't notice much difference in my sleep or energy moving to the Whole30, but when I switched to a vegan diet, my sleep improved dramatically and I had so much more energy. So for me at least, a high carb diet with macros close to 75-15-15 is optimal, but different people may respond differently and prefer different ratios. Using a tool like Cronometer can be very eye-opening. Most people have no idea what their nutrition looks like. I certainly had no idea what my macro breakdown was when I was eating a standard omnivorous diet, but using Cronometer you can get a better idea of what works best for you. Furthermore, the macronutrient people seem to worry about the most on a plant-based or vegan diet is protein. Where do you get your protein? The most common question vegans hear. And with a much smaller percentage of my calories coming from protein, you might think I'm deficient. But let's start by actually figuring out my personal protein needs. There are online calculators that can help you determine your needs based on your age, sex, and activity levels. The one I used shows a safe lower limit of 43 grams a day with a recommended amount of 52 to 94 grams of protein per day. On my SAD diet, I got well over that recommended amount at 112.8 grams. Most people worry about not getting enough protein, when in reality, most people are getting way too much. On my Whole30, I got even more, a staggering 128.9 grams a day, nearly 2.5 times more than I need. This is quite concerning to me considering we now know that too much protein is not necessarily a good thing, especially when it comes to longevity. And finally, drumroll please, on my vegan diet, I'm getting 87.2 grams of protein. This is significantly more than my minimum required amount and well within my recommended level of 52 to 94 grams a day. And I wasn't even trying to focus on getting plenty of protein. This is just simply eating a variety of different whole plant foods. Hopefully that helps to bust the myth that it's a challenge to get enough protein on a vegan diet. And for those of you who are very physically active and wanting to bulk up, no need to worry. Extra exercise means you'll require more calories, and more calories means that you'll proportionately be getting more protein as well. And while everyone is so concerned about protein, I'm more concerned about fiber. A majority of Americans, on the order of something like 95 to 97%, are not even getting the minimum recommended amount of fiber. I always made a point to at least try to follow the food pyramid or other guides, so by getting my servings of fruit and veggies, I did manage to get the minimum fiber amounts. 32 grams on my SAD diet and 34 grams on my Whole30. But there's always room for improvement when it comes to fiber. And as long as you ramp up your fiber intake slowly, your gut bugs will thank you. It took some time, but my gut is so much happier now that I'm eating even more fiber. As you can see, my typical vegan day had 85 grams. I believe the increased fiber was key in helping me to control my ulcerative colitis. If you want more on that, I'll include a link here to the video where I tell my UC story. And the next time someone asks about your protein, you might suggest they take a look at their fiber intake instead. Next, let's talk a little bit about fat as well. Omega-3s are always a hot topic. Interestingly, on my SAD diet, even including fish, my omega-3 was just a bit short. It's pretty close, so not bad, but I find it interesting that my SAD diet was short, while on my vegan diet, I got nearly 3 times the recommended amount of omega-3s. Of course, there is debate about conversion of short-chain to long-chain omega-3s. I'm not going to weigh in on that debate. I recommend working with your doctor or dietitian based on your personal situation. But if you are concerned about your conversion rates, you can always get long-chain omega-3s from algae-based sources. Now that we've covered the macros, let's run through some micronutrients. In terms of vitamins, my SAD diet was a little lacking in B vitamins, but everything else was pretty solid. On the Whole30, vitamin intake was great. And although my vegan diet isn't 100%, it's looking better than my SAD diet. Of course, B12 is showing 0, but this is easily supplemented, and I definitely recommend everyone eating a plant-based diet take a B12 supplement. Before anyone tries to tell you how unnatural that is, just remember that much of the B12 in meat actually comes from a supplement as well. Animal feed is often fortified with B12. I personally would rather take the supplement directly than getting it secondhand. Vitamin D is also low here, but we all know this is the sunshine vitamin. So if you're on a plant-based diet, you may want to pay more attention to your vitamin D levels and work with your doctor to monitor and adjust based on your own sun exposure or supplementation. On a SAD diet, many people get a lot of their vitamin D from milk, which is also fortified. So again, it's basically like a supplement anyway. Finally, let's take a quick look at minerals. On my SAD diet, there are a few that are a little short, but overall, I'd say it's not bad. The worst thing is that my sodium was way too high. Because of the elimination of processed foods, my sodium level on Whole30 was much better, and minerals were pretty good as well. On my vegan diet, the minerals are looking strong as well. Plus, I'm happy to see that my sodium is lower than the recommended upper intake. The only other real concern here is selenium, but I easily remedy this by having a few Brazil nuts a week, which are high in selenium. The last mineral I want to point out is iron. Iron is another huge concern for new vegans, and most people think you have to be on an omnivorous diet to get enough. But in fact, my vegan diet is the only one where I was getting adequate iron levels. So if you're thinking about trying a vegan diet, or maybe you're already eating that way and just looking for a good comeback the next time someone asks you about your protein, I hope this video was helpful. And the purpose of this video isn't to say which style of diet is better than another. It's to demonstrate that with a little planning, it's possible to get all of the nutrients you need regardless of how you choose to eat. What's funny is nobody cares about any of these things when you're eating a standard American diet. But as soon as you do anything outside of the norm, suddenly everyone becomes a nutrition expert. But no matter how many doctors and influencers are out there saying how they have the best diet, the truth is the most basic nutrition advice hasn't really changed in the last 100 years or so. We all know we should eat more fruits and vegetables and less processed foods and saturated fat. That advice never changes. So no matter your current diet, I hope this video inspires you to take your health and nutrition into your own hands by tracking a few days to see where you're at and where you might have room for improvement. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I hope to see you next time.